Fantasy title to launch on the PlayStation 2 with more powerful console, allowing it to also become the first Final Fantasy title to utilize fully three-dimensional areas and voice acting. Additionally, it was the first Final Fantasy game to ever get a direct sequel, with Final Fantasy X-2 releasing in 2003 for the PlayStation 2. The sequel followed Yuna, Riku, and the new companion Pain as they traveled across Spira, looking for Tidus while trying to resolve political conflicts in the area. Early ideas for the game's premise were quite different from the final version. Initially, the key development theme was inevitable death, with the idea being that it was common for people to die at 17 years of age. Though this idea was scrapped, it was carried over in some way, as the fate of the summoner is to die young while fighting sin. Another early concept was that the premise would revolve a deadly disease spreading throughout the world. Yuna was set to take on the role of a nurse who follows Yevon's teachings and treats patients while on her pilgrimage, with Yevon being more like a Red Cross type of organization. The planned plot twist was that the treatment method for the disease was the real cause of death in those afflicted. Final Fantasy X was the first game to have a strong Asian influence in its visual design, with all the other games up until that point being quite foreign from a Japanese point of view. Early Final Fantasy games appeared to have more of a European medieval setting, as well as Final Fantasy IX, and some games had a more modern, futuristic Western feel, such as Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII. It was Final Fantasy X's scenario writer, Kazushika Nojima, that suggested a more Asian setting, and staff from the development team visited locations in Southeast Asia, such as Bali and Thailand, to draw inspiration. Japanese influences are evident in Yuka's kimono, Horn's samurai outfit, Lulu's hairstyle, and more. Additionally, Final Fantasy X was the first game to have its theme song sung in Japanese, in its traditional Japanese folk style rather than a pop song. There were initially plans for Final Fantasy X to incorporate some new gameplay features, but due to limitations at the time, these ideas couldn't be used. Firstly, it was originally planned that all monsters would be walking around on a field map and the players could seamlessly enter into battle with them. However, this idea was later recycled to be used in Final Fantasy XII. There were also plans for the game to have online capabilities, but ultimately, this first Final Fantasy to receive any online elements was Square Enix's first MMORPG, Final Fantasy XI. When Final Fantasy X first released in Japan in 2001, it sold over 1.4 million copies in 4 days, which set a new record for the fastest selling RPG for console. Additionally, Square Enix revealed in 2004 that the game had sold over 6.6 million copies worldwide. Square had initially estimated sales would be around 2 million copies worldwide for Final Fantasy X, believing that sales would be lower because of the smaller player base for PlayStation 2, as it was a new console. In 2013, it was announced by Square Enix that Final Fantasy X series Fantasy games typically try to steer clear of showing blood, though there are some notable exceptions throughout the titles, such as during the opening scene of Final Fantasy VIII when Squall's face is cut by Cypher. However, it remains that blood is largely unused or kept to a minimum, especially during battle scenes where you expect it most. Final Fantasy X has few moments where blood is shown throughout the game, most prominently during the raid of Lone and all over the sand in the aftermath of Operation Mian. Moreover, there are other occasions such as when the Kurascano boss monster attacks a Saigon near the beginning of the game, and on Anima's face when it is summoned for the first time. I think the boss she was referring to is when Tidus is stuck in the water, when the Alpid send him to be helped during the beginning of the game, after he is attacked by Sinback when he's in Xanarkand. I don't remember the name of that boss, but I guess that's what that's referring to. Final Fantasy X proved to be so popular that it has appeared in other media. In the sitcom 2.5 Men, during the episode Weekend in Bangkok with the two Olympic gymnastics, Jake rents a copy of Final Fantasy X. However, the show makes a couple of mistakes. First, Jake refers to it as the new Final Fantasy, despite the glaze being clearly being greatest hits version. Secondly, when Jake is later playing the game, the music being played is actually from Final Fantasy II. Additionally, the game is also mentioned in Thomas Paine's novel Bleeding Edge. During the end scene between Tidus and Yuna in the English version of Final Fantasy X, Yuna's parting words to Tidus are, "I love you." However, in the Japanese version, she says, "Thank you," instead. This was a result of the head of the localization, Alexander O. Smith, pushing for it to be changed for the English release. There was resistance